Happy Friday, Brian Manning here with a weekly update. Let's get right to it. So Monday and Tuesday were relatively quiet news days. So what I'd like to look at here is just a comparison of inflation between CPI and PCE and really which one is better. So for the longest time, we said CPI was the better gauge of inflation. But really looking at this PCE now probably would be more accurate. The reason why I say that is because PCE really strips out more of the volatile items. And CPI is very shelter heavy. So if we look at the difference right now, so the current core rate of CPI is at 3.41%. And of this, 5.4% is really built in for the shelter cost. So shelter makes up about 45% of this reading. But if we look at actual numbers for shelter, so we look at CoreLogic plus others, actual shelter is really going up at 3%. So if we look at leases, this would be new leases being signed and lease renewals. So if we have 3% versus 5.4, if we look at the difference here, we really have an overstatement in shelter of around 1.1%, just because this makes up about 45% of the reading. So if we looked at actual data right now, so true numbers, not the lagging effect that this report pulls in, actual core CPI is really more in that 2.3% range. And again, the Federal Reserve is trying to get to a 2% target. Then we look at PCE. So this is a personal consumption expenditure. Technically, PCE is the Federal Reserve's favorite gauge of inflation. Right now, it's at 2.57%. 21% of this is shelter. So they have in here shelter going up at 5.5%. Again, still, if we use the same number, shelter is really going up at around 3% right now. Again, that's new leases being signed along with lease renewals. So this is an overstatement in this number by about 0.5%. Which means actual PCE right now is going up at 2.1%. Again, the Federal Reserve's gauge for inflation is really trying to get this at 2%. So if we were using true real life numbers right now, not the numbers that are, have a lag effect attached to them, we would definitely see inflation almost at where the Federal Reserve wants it to be, which would probably lead us closer to a rate cut, which we'll talk more about in a second. Wednesday this week, we had Jerome Powell speaking. Some comments for Jerome Powell were good. He said he needs to see a little bit more of the taming of inflation, and that would strengthen their confidence for a rate cut. But what he did say is that the job market has cooled considerably. If you've watched any of these videos in the past, we've said for quite a while that job market softening is going to be the golden ticket for a rate cut. Now we're starting to see inflation continue to soften as well. But he said if the labor market weakened unexpectedly, that would definitely lead to a rate cut. Then this week, we also got some feedback on U.S. corporation bankruptcy filings. Is something important to watch. So in 2024 so far, we've had 364 corporate bankruptcy filings. This is the highest number in 13 years. This is important because when we look at the BLS, that's the Bureau of Labor Statistics, when we look at their reports and what they're telling us for employment, a lot of what they look at is modeling through this birth-death ratio. Well, if you have 346 companies that filed for bankruptcy, none of this yet is really going to get factored into the employment numbers. The reason why is because in this birth-death ratio, they're going to look at companies that not that went through bankruptcy, but really ones that closed down and closed their books. So we're probably seeing a little bit of a lag effect there, and the employment numbers probably looking stronger than they actually are, because if you just look at corporate bankruptcy filings, unfortunately, we're seeing the highest number there in 13 years. Then Thursday this week, we got CPI reports. So this is for the month of June. This is inflation reading. Our headline number was down 0.1% on a month-over-month basis. On a year-over-year basis, this moved us from 3.27 down to 2.98, which is really great to see. The core reading for inflation, this strips out volatile items such as food and energy. This moved from 3.41% down to 3.28. So really good to see a positive movement here. This is definitely a welcoming sign in the marketplace. If we look at these numbers and figure out, well, hey, where did this all come from? Shelter makes up 45% of this reading. Again, shelter is still really lagging. What's interesting to see is owner's equivalent of rent is still a high number. So owner's equivalent of rent is like you get a phone call and someone says to you, hey, if you're going to rent your house today, excluding the cost of utilities, how much would you rent it for? And they call you next month and they say, hey, if you're going to rent your house now, how much is you rent it for? Again, still excluding utilities. So it's kind of a tough number to really gauge it by, but it definitely has an impact in it. So shelter is still a big number in here. Then we have motor vehicle insurance. Car prices and used car prices have started to come down. We've seen a little bit of a softening on these numbers here. It's up 0.9%. That's still a really big number to see an increase on a month-over-month basis, but it's definitely down from where it was. What's interesting, if we strip out the items such as shelter, and we strip out the items such as motor vehicle insurance, which would never be impacted by interest rates, Everything else, as far as inflation is concerned, was only at 0.19%. So the inflation numbers are looking really good. What I wanted to really look at as well, just so you could really understand how shelter works, this is the lagging in the shelter that we're seeing. So, we really saw rents peak somewhere around here, and then we saw rents start to come down. But right now, the shelter numbers, which lag by maybe even up to 2 years, yes, they've peaked and they're starting to come down, but they're nowhere near real world numbers, which are really at 3%. So we are starting to see this rollover. This is really starting to become impactful in the inflation numbers, which is great to see. It looks like word on the street right now is that July Fed rate cut, probably not on the table unless something significant happens in the economy or with unemployment. But there's a 100% bet right now on a September rate cut. And I think I'm feeling the same as well. I think we're seeing these inflation numbers come down. I think we're seeing softening in the employment market. I would have to agree that I'm not sure I'm at 100% right now for a September rate cut, but I am definitely on the high probable side of a September rate cut. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, but I think that's what we are leaning towards. Happy Friday. I hope you have a wonderful day. Reach out if you have any questions. I'm available 7 days a week, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m.